God kväll allihopa och välkommen till första mötet av Kungliga Fysiografiska sällskapet för 2025. Jag heter Erik Warrant och jag är den nya preses här i sällskapet och som jag brukar säga, eftersom jag kommer från Australien, jag brukar inte prata svenska, jag pratar hemska, så jag förlåter mig i förväg. Men vi har ett fantastiskt intressant kväll. Ikväll vi har någon som ska föreläsa för oss. Jag ska byta över till engelska eftersom han kommer att föreläsa på engelska. I'll introduce you in English. So it's an enormous pleasure to introduce Professor Niccolo Dell Unto from our university here in Lund. He is Professor of Archaeology at the Department of Archaeology and Ancient History. And the great and interesting thing about Niccolo's work is that he has been developing new modern techniques to investigate history. And it's quite a groundbreaking new field, which you're a leader in. And it's really exciting that you're here tonight to be able to tell us a little bit about this work. And I think archaeology, I think all of us find it an extremely fascinating topic. I certainly do. And new methods to study archaeology and to study history are not only welcome, but they're also extremely fascinating. So a very warm welcome to you. And the title of your talk is Interpreting and Visualizing the Past in the Age of Digital Technology. Warm welcome. Oh, and I should mention also that Niccolo has been newly elected to Physiographen in the humanistic class. So warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you for being here. It's great. I'm really enjoying the seminars and the community. I found it extremely interesting. So today we will talk about archaeology, but mainly we will focus on how technology change our way of interpreting the past. So something to say is that what I will present, I think, might apply to several other fields. Actually, we constantly exchange perspectives and field of view, also views with colleagues in similar other fields. And it's interesting to see how actually technology påverkar, in a way, or steer our way of creating knowledge, of defining information, and most important, especially today in the age of the AI, actually this might have a very strong impact in future generation, the capacity of future generation of retrieving and data and reusing data. So just a brief introduction. Well, it was already done, so we can skip it quickly. Just a few words about the presentation will be a very first part. It's just a short presentation, and then I would like to bring you into some short theoretical perspective, which has affected deeply our work. And then instead, I would like to present some examples of our technology or the way of how we have been using across the years, and now we use technology for actually identifying or interpretation or identifying new archaeological finds, and then presenting some of the latest development that we had. So yes, I'm coordinating the Lund University Digital Archaeology Lab, which is probably the smallest infrastructure at Lund University. I'm almost sure about it. And we are running our research of course is based at the Department of Archaeology from very few years, but we started with our, I would say, parent infrastructure, which is the Lund University Humanities Lab, which we're still working together quite a lot with great results. And of course, at the end of this presentation, you will find more information if you're interested in our job on our website, which contain more or less everything we do, including teaching and seminars and so vidare. I'm actually learning Swedish quite quickly, so sometimes I blended. So apology for that. I'm jumping between Italian, English, and Swedish. So what is the issue for us? The issue is that we destroy entirely what we discover in the very same moment. So archaeology is a destructive, I would say, approach, science. We cannot repeat actually the experiments. When you're actually identifying an archaeological area, or you start the archaeological investigation, the only way to go through, after, of course, using the so-called remote sensing of having a pre-investigation, what might be underground, we basically destroy it. So we remove it systematically, and so that's the reason why documentation for us is central. So it's not an option. So documentation is always characterized in the last, I would say, 60 years, archaeology quite deeply. And also the possibility and capacity of understanding events in the past depends from the quality of documentation and how it's done. Now, of course, this is a limit, but also a possibility. Documentation or technology has changed quite a lot. And in the last 20 years has been truly, I would say crazy in a way. So we run today instruments and tools which would have never thought to be able to do when actually I was a student long ago. So this picture, it's, well, we were pictured in Forskning in Framtiden, and the author of the paper, he made this fantastic sketch, which I think represent quite well our activity. So although we are digital archaeologists, I think in our department we are the one most in the field. So we excavate quite a lot, in which we do not only, of course, investigate the past, but we also test new technologies and test new ways of documenting and then study, interpreting, merging information. So on the left is the way of how we have been pictured in a way after an interview. On the right is, I would say, is more chaotic representation of what we're actually running right now. So there is, you probably are aware that now there is a huge investment in the European community about the ACCH, which is a very large repository in which all the European heritage information are going to be shared at any level. And the great challenge is to be sure that the information, once reached the cloud, can be reused not just by archaeologists or cultural heritage professionals, but everyone. So, and when I say everyone, I mean all of you, I mean in every field, because the real challenge is not actually to use archaeological information for archaeologists, but is actually reusing making archaeological information useful for biologists or for historians or for physicists. That actually is the real challenge I think we have ahead. So as I promised, some very boring, of course, there must be theoretical frame. A few years ago with a colleague of mine, James Taylor from the University of York, we have been, after working together many years in the field, we have been discussing why, for example, we produce fantastic 3D models and then archaeologists come to us and say, can I have a picture of it? Can I have a section of it? You know, it's interesting. At the beginning, after a lot of frustration, we realized that maybe this was actually a skeuomorphic approach. So we've been defining a theory, I don't know if it's correct or not, but at least it's been published, in which we think actually that we need basically to emulate every time we bring a new technology in the field. What actually is happening is that we emulate, so we use the technology as the previous technology. This, of course, is something new. We have been start looking at it from prehistory and from many examples. And then after that, we socialize with the tool, and after that, we transform practice. So even if you have the most up-to-date, fantastic technology in your hands, we notice that it takes time for us to digest it, because the real core, the real important part seems to be not very much the data produced, but the practice used to make this data or to create this data. And the practice is a cultural thing. And so in culture, it's difficult to change. So you need to invest. You cannot be passive, must be active. So now my students never get this joke. I know, it's extremely sad, but that is big data. Yes, I knew I could count on you. Of course, it's very frustrating. You show this in class and no one says, oh. So, however, so Christian Christiansen, for example, in a very seminal article about art science, well, in Swedish current archaeology, describe the impact of art science in archaeology. Among the humanities, we are definitely in archaeology the one experimenting, I would say most, but a lot, with art science. So we have chemistry, DNA, and a lot, physics, geophysics, for example. So we also have PhD students in archaeology which specialize in these fields. So it's really entering into the field. And it's interesting because it demonstrates in this article how archaeology has changed in the last few years. I mean, drastically changed. And my point is that everything we have, the way we were used to seek for information, it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, my teachers at the University of Rome, they used to take me to the archives and together show me how to, find information in the archives, using them. Archives has moved in a digital world. And so a big question is, are we capable of doing that? Can we teach this to our students? And so we have been really looking into this and trying understanding how this information change our way of perceiving, in our case, the past, and also how these are perceived by actually different generations. There is an immense gap between, for example, me and 2 generations before. And my students today, they have a strong literacy in digital. So although I would say I'm the expert in digital archaeology, they are the one which they speak digital archaeology in first language. So it's not the same thing. However, interesting is that we start experimenting quite a lot and mixing. I mean, bringing technology, tablets, understanding. For example, it was extremely fascinating to see when you start having 3D high-resolution representation of something that you have already destroyed, but you're standing on it, you start brainstorming in a completely different way. You start planning your excavation, actually relying real time in the field of information that do not exist anymore. And eventually, you haven't removed yourself. So we have been looking at how structuring databases, and of course, most important, how is the discussion going on in the field when you have such tools. I'm completely lost and inspired by Clark and of course Chalmers, but Clark was the leading researcher in defining the extended mind. I mean, when I read this article, I was fascinated. They are talking about the extended mind, like the possibility of extending your understanding of your mind by coupling with external devices. Now, you will say, of course it is. We all do it nowadays. Yes, but this was in the 90s, when mobile phone didn't exist. And actually, so I think this is so inspiring for us. And actually, we have been looking into this, or the way of how we engage with technologies, actually following quite a lot, and this direction. And I can tell you that, well, of course, we are not philosophers. I know there are philosophers in the room, and feel free to, of course, to question this and so on. But I'm very happy to listen or in your direction. But it was particularly interesting because it's not just creating a relation with, for example, a mobile phone or with the technology. Now, this technology has a very strong agency and in a way affect the way of how we communicate with each other. So we're looking into this quite a lot, and we notice that more and more actually 3D visualization environments, which can include an incredible amount of information coming from different fields, are not places where actually you discover something, are actually places where you think. Where this, for example, was in Pompeii, and we were in Pompeii with this in our hands and start thinking to what was around us, but through the lens of something that we couldn't perceive because, it's only on the digital world. It was extremely fascinating, the fact that how much our capacity of understanding, in our case, the past, is actually affected by the type of data and the way the data is being created or connected one to each other. And of course, the work of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, was very inspiring in many ways to understand how humans perceive the environment in a, in a kind of deep way, and also using all our senses and so on. So another interesting aspect that we notice is the fact that data are not the same data before. For example, in archaeology, you would have recorded this trench using, for example, a geometrical drawings, in which you basically record the interpretation that you perceive in the field. So you excavate, you make a decision making, and you create a specific drawings which display what actually is what. This is a deep simplification, so I apologize for that. Today, instead, when you have a 3D model, you generate, in the very same moment you generate a 3D model, you have at least 3 very powerful type of data. All of those with very different affordances. I can tell you, they look like the same, they are absolutely not. For example, the second one, by exporting it in a specific format. This was in Västravång, the first experiment was in Çatalhöyük in Turkey. Was extremely interesting. Actually, I cleaned myself this is 9,000 years old house, and I couldn't see anything. By running this analysis in the field, the system identifying 3 cuts, which are like burials. They used to bury their deers under the floor. And I couldn't see them. but the system cooled. So we excavated and we found it. So what I'm trying to say is that's really like in a very, you know, when you start losing words, it's terrible. Yeah. However, in a transhumanism approach, in a very transhumanist view, I mean, we extended our capacity of understanding by actually using this technology and discussing to each other. The discussion has been going on from Deleuze, when he's talking about virtual reality, but also Levy talking about collective intelligence. And it's interesting because archaeologists already at the beginning of the 2000s, they start thinking about, well, we need to go behind the illustration. You know, all these things I'm telling you now, at the very beginning were just hypothesized, and they were using 3D just to making nice pictures for publications. And you know, as I say, it was very frustrating, and so there was something missing. So people at this time couldn't understand why. And Matt Edgeworth, one of my favorites, is an ethnoarchaeologist. So basically, he's an archaeologist who studies how archaeologists, of course, document. And it's interesting because he said and he noticed that computer representation can definitely be used to challenge theories. So not just for making a discovery, but really for discussing, for understanding, for making a step forward during the investigation. He actually has this very interesting work called from spade work to screen work, where actually he described the fact that we do not anymore really live in the physical world. We work, and we don't live in the virtual world, like Cyberpunk, for example, novel, which was very inspiring at the beginning of the 90s. So all of us, we constantly move from the digital and the physical all the time. Just today, I exchanged messages and cheers and hearts with my family in Rome, friends in US, and so on. This is a way of building relations, but it's happened also in science. So actually, when we are in the field, Zubrov described this quite well. Before, it was an isolated environment. He called it the village. It's true. You were there 2 months, you don't see anyone. And actually, I remember when I was working in Syria, I got a person coming outside my door with a floppy disk. I have to save my email there, and he was going, far away and send it to my family. And then, really, today is not like that. Today you have a model, you have something, and you send it directly to the specialist in Australia, wherever you want, and this person reply you back in a few seconds. So this is changing quite a lot, and this is Chadaloyuk was an example of some of the tests we did long, long ago. And for example, in this case, once he came out, this is an old example. I like to use it quite often. We found this. We were cleaning a wall, and it came out a piece of clay with some ochre, red ochre. So automatically, when you have an ochre on it, it goes in the conservation lab. And when they clean it, they actually found this. These are obsidian eyes. We call it the beast. Feature 666. Can you believe it? It was really cool. Fantastic, with multiple layers of restoration and so on. And the big question was where it was. We knew it was a part of a wall, but we didn't know exactly where. Because in archaeological documentation, you actually document context and features. So, but you know what? Because we had 3D model in the past, we could actually detect the model where this feature was. And then because it was completely covered by plaster and we wanted to see if actually it was part of the monument, we realigned in 3D the cleaned, the head, and we found a shrink. So we identifying a monument, which was basically the archaeologists miss it. We miss it. Because when you don't see everything in one piece, it's easy actually to miss information. And this is also another lesson learned, not only for archaeologists. So another great collaboration happened with in Sandbyborg. Is an Iron Age site, Vendel period, in the Highland of Holland. I hope I pronounced it well. It was like Halland, Holland. So, and we found basically an homicide, so a crime scene from the Iron Age. So, well, the red body was found the first year, then it was like moved to Lund to be studied by PhD students, and the year after, we made a 3D model, the year after, we went back, we excavated the whole house, and it came out the rest of the body, which was only stitching one part of it. And so, studying these things all in different parts is complicated. So we have a complete 3D high-resolution model, and we start just drag and drop the pieces, and we have everything, like the weapons and everything. And then the osteologists at that time, well, today, Ellen Nielsen, she worked for Sydsvensk Arkeologi, but at that time she was PhD students with us. She, well, instead of making, let's say, a normal osteological analysis, we discussed, why don't we do it in 3D? And it's interesting because actually just asking post-mortem to the database show us all the fracture post-mortem, so the fracture which occur after the death, it came out a perfect parallel path, which we believe was the roof collapsing on the bodies and cracking them. So it was extremely interesting. And this led the attention to the police. After a while, I got contacted by homicide police in Malm. and it was extremely interesting because they saw the article and they were interested in understanding how to implement, for example, this type of approach within forensic. So we have several meetings, and now after many years, we created FURARK, which is based at Lund University. We are very proud of it, and it's a collaboration with the forensic police, in which we help each other, or we update each other every year on new methods, methodology, and so on. It's not always pleasant, so, especially when they have presentations, but it's extremely useful. We learn a lot, and there is a huge exchange of information. And so you see how actually these techniques, as I said at the beginning, are not only for archaeology, actually can really be applied to a larger degree. Archaeobotanics also extremely interesting. We don't actually have the seeds on site, but we can visualize and represent in those. And so in this case, this is actually a master thesis work a few years ago. And we try to combine the work of Uppåkra with analysis on the seeds retrieved close by to an oven. And it's interesting to see how actually you can almost track movements in a way, right, of how the material are moving. And this is completely invisible, because you never had this information, even if you make an analysis of the seeds, which telling you, for example, what kind of meal they were using or anything else. But it's particularly fascinating to see how intangible information, when actually is visualized, it gives you a lot back. Stura Forvar, also another very interesting case in which we have been using data from 100 years ago with a method of excavation which today will lead anywhere. They were not following the context, but just removing 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. And it was particularly interesting because allow us, by basically engaging this in the third dimension, to reconstruct the way of how these archaeologists in the 19th century excavated it, and then by combining with the database ceramics, we could understand findings, we could understand or reconstruct the stratigraphic sequence. It was almost, sort of, not science fiction, but it was really, really rewarding. It's a real case of data reuse, actually, which there are not so many nowadays. We also work a lot in the landscape. This is a fantastic project which was LMCO was financed a PhD for artificial intelligence, kind of actually ahead. Now everybody talk about AI, but this was really early on in archaeologists. And you know that Sweden is completely mapped in 3D with LiDAR data. So this means that if you know that Sweden is basically for the majority covered by forest, and the possibility of using or having that LiDAR data allow you to remove the forest and see under canopy, so at least appreciate a part of it. And basically, through a collaboration between archaeologists, computer scientists, we got finance for basically training an algorithm to automatically find archaeological finds for us. It was a long way, but very fruitful. In this case, we used machine learning, and it was fantastic because the results were excellent. So if you see on top right side, actually, so this is from Riksantikvarieämbetet. So it's what actually the state knows about the archaeological site that we have. But it's too dense, it's too vast. So after training the algorithm, basically, the algorithm identifying hundreds of archaeological sites unknown. And you know what? What is the funny things? We went to verify those, and we got lost in the forest. I know. It's interesting because this is say a lot. Actually, we are losing a lot of skills. This is normal. It's nothing strange. But we're also losing the possibility of navigating this kind of landscape. Even actually, we had the GPS with us. So it was not just only embarrassing, but it actually displayed the fact that we don't really have the capacity as a human being of surveying so many informations. And that's why now we just a bit an application with machine control for having the dog robot. And I'm serious about that, and actually try to see if we can actually get the combination in machine control between drones and robot to help us, for example, navigate in the landscape. I know it's a little bit crazy, but this is part of our job, isn't it? And it's also extremely, extremely interesting. Moving toward the last part, I know we have limited time. One of the latest, and I would say most successful part of our work, recent work, has been after pandemic or during the pandemic, the idea of looking into digital infrastructures. So digital infrastructures are crucial, are central today, not only for carry on with our science and our work, but for everything, for education, for creating narratives, for everything. Well, the same government has, discussed, or is, they have been really picturing a lot of fundings for, and Europe as well. I mean, it's one of the major agendas at the moment. What is the problem? During pandemic, we had a lot of digital infrastructure, and also we had a lot of frustration. And why so? Because we suddenly realized that actually, even if we have information online, it's not so easy to use. So if you take Europeano, many others, are mainly conceived for pointing you out where the data are, or where actually the physical data are. But you cannot really easily make research using the digital data. And we were not happy with that. So we started the project. This was just before pandemic. And it's funny because at that time, a lot of colleagues say, oh, yeah, this is a good project, go on with it. So no, eventually, no, there was not much interest, I would say. And we say, well, we are going to 3D scan all the reference collection that we have at the Institute and test it with the student to see if it works. And then pandemic came. And that actually became not only an incredible resource for Lund University, but for University of Oslo, Bergen, Stockholm. They're still using it in their courses. So, but why was particular? Because scanning was not really the issue. This is one of the national library in France. I was visited last year, and it's beautiful. And it's not just beautiful because it is beautiful. It's beautiful because every single thing in here is made for let the people read. So it's not just a question of books. It's also a question of space, or actually the people engage with knowledge. So we think, well, we should do the same things within a digital platform. We need to be sure that actually when someone enters it, this person has all the instruments that this person needs for generating new knowledge, for exchanging knowledge. So we have been working very hard, especially on that. Plus, 3D models is nothing new. Plus, their cast copies are everywhere from the 19th century, even earlier. And I can tell you, generation of archaeologists has been trained just using 3D in this way. And someone thinks about these are copies. Are absolutely not copies. These are real data. At the point that these are so important today that the community, this is Copenhagen, spend money for restoration. So this means that actually they have the very same value of the originals, because means something for us. And that is what we should aim at our data. When the data will mean something for us, we are safe that the data will be properly kept. So we have been engaged with it's called a dynamic collection. And it's a platform which started as a complete experiment. It's not just the possibility of looking at 3D information, but also getting statistics out of it, analyzing the system, analyzing every single object, extracting information, but most important, actually also writing online your own thoughts or interpretation and then sharing with someone else on the other part of the world. Or actually we do it with our students. We do exams now with that sometimes. So it's interesting because they actually have to take your collection, enriching with information, and then this actually, the interpretation is kept with it. It's interesting because Start and Grinsen, for example, discussing about biological museum, they actually discuss as a museum object as objects which are in between different words. It is true. An object, that object for an archaeologist means something, for an art historian and biologist means something else. So the possibility of having an infrastructure which allow us to see these things together, it's fundamental today. It's actually at the very core of cross-disciplinary. However, so this grow a lot. We got a lot of support, financial support. It started very small, and now we have hundreds of archaeological artifacts, not only from Lund, but we actually have artifacts from Stockholm, from Blekinge. Actually, the same system has been adopted by the University of Oslo, which is the national repository, and now we are the national repository for Sweden for 3D artifacts, with more and more requests from the medieval museums. Just contact me yesterday. So we have, and it's interesting because the new version allow you to also to let the museums taking care of their data. Everything is copyrighted or has a specific information of how you should use the data, and the data, they have a DOI. Why this is important? Because if I make this model, and the model has a DOI, and if you want to use the model, it's completely for free. But if you publish with it, you need actually to cite me. So in this way, actually, we found a way, or we're investing in the way how actually researcher can be rewarded in sharing the data. And apparently it's working quite well. Plus, the possibility of 3D printing. This is the 3D print of my kids. They were not very happy, but because I pay for it, and I say, well, I can use it as much as I like. And yes, of course, we have a lot of teachers. We actually ask us to, if they can 3D print it, because these objects need to be also, they actually need to see their ergonomy, for example, how they were used. And it's particularly interesting. And it's not only archaeologists. We have a fantastic collaboration with the Biological Museum, and so a lot of discussion with Eric, and it's fantastic. Now we have a lot of specimens. We are expanding not only in because image how interesting could be, just for example, studying extincted animals from an osteological perspective together with actually artifacts of the time. So it's not just about archaeology, it's much more. Just a minute. We have a similar situation. We are actually invested now quite a lot also on 3D making available. This is all online, by the way, so you can access with any computer, and you don't need any software. Also archaeological excavations, which are much more complex entities in terms of that organization. And for example, this is the work of Gripsunden, which is led by Brendan Foley, and this in particular is a piece of work of Paolo De Ruda's PhD, which he discussed a couple of years ago with great success. And so Gripsunden, you can actually see entirely how the investigation has been carried out, and most important, marine archaeologists have been using it quite a lot, because you cannot go underwater so many times. And also when you are underwater, you don't really have the time to brainstorm information. So you see, this actually creates a sort of temporal gap, or allow you to go in a multi-temporal way in a different place, together by enriching your interpretation in it. Because a 3D model doesn't say really much. It's actually more what the specialists have said of that 3D model that really matter. So the possibility of adding these layers of information is basically a great legacy also for future generation working. And of course, we have been noticing that this has been changing entirely the way of how archaeologists or scientists discuss on site. Completely. So really the logistic of the way of how we meet, talk, and exchange information is being revolutionized. And not because technology, but because we have been observing how technology was changing actually our way of doing science, or our way of discovering new information and so on. And this is happening every day, and is unstoppable. So we have only the choice of deciding if doing this actively or passively, which I believe, of course, we all know the right answer to it. There is much, much more that we are carrying on at the moment. There is really a lot of very interesting initiatives and projects going also towards AI, especially generative AI. And we are extremely interested in see how archives can be harvested and can be reused information. Who is using the information? Can you believe that the major reuser of information are not humans at the moment? And we've been spending a lot really to understand how the information should be reused and so on. And this is actually, it's not a problem. It's just something to consider. And so we have been also now expanding to social science. We're using quite a lot technique called discourse analysis. This is used actually for running a lot of interesting type of analysis when it's about looking at speech, for understanding, for example, when reuse occur. So we are producing massive data. Do we need all of them? It's interesting because in one of our last experiments, we noticed that only a very short percentage of data are actually really crucial for the discussion. Many others are not. So we're asking, why so? Why do we have this gap? Do we really need to spend so much resources to acquire everything, or this could be for future? So it's a never-ending discussion. And thank you so much.
Okay, I think we can open up the floor for questions. I've got the microphone, so I can bring it with me.
Thank you for interesting but also fundamentally confusing presentation. I understood, I think, certain aspects of your presentation, but there were some fundamental things that escaped me, I'm afraid. What do you mean, for example, by the effects far beyond the sphere of discovery? I have no idea what that possibly could mean. I have no idea also why a 3D representation of the seed distribution at a site would be much better than just counting the seeds, doing a contour plot, 2D or whatever, to infer where the oven might have been located. So my question really is, yes, the new technology can indeed enhance and help us to understand, well, not necessarily understand, but to see what the archaeological findings, where they are located, how they are layered, and so forth. But that kind of philosophical, fundamental new understanding, I didn't really get, I'm afraid.
Thank you for your question. Of course, there was a lot of things in this very short presentation, but it's a good point. First of all, the first question about behind the sphere of discovery. So when Matt Edgeworth specifically used this example, he referred to the fact that, for example, if you take in satellite images, or you might have read on the newspaper, for example, that now with LiDAR, a lot of archaeologists have discovered new pyramids, for example. Or what does it mean? It means basically you use a technique for having a very specific result. So you apply, for example, remote sensing or a specific combination of multispectral analysis to see one thing. And then, you got your result and you discover something. Then you take this result outside the digital world and you use it as you like. This is usually a typical use of technology, as could be art science, for example. In reality, actually, you notice that people is not working like that with digital data. So they don't go into the digital world for detecting one information. Sometimes they use it just for discussing, just for reviewing things together. And eventually, what they're looking for comes actually in the field. I'll give you an example. I was in Greece this summer, 45 degrees. I'm not going anymore in July. Yeah, and we were running an experiment with discourse analysis. And so we were basically interviewing archaeologists excavating a trench. And we asked them, use the system for telling your story, for telling your daily activities. It was extremely interesting to see the generational gap. But what's happened is that when two trench supervisors were showing this to us, suddenly another one, which was supposed to be saying nothing because it was actually a recorded experiment, noticed something in it. And he said, oh, we missed that today. It was actually part of a wall quite important for understanding. It was a fortification of a Neolithic site in Thessaloniki, north of Thessaloniki. So what's happened is that they've been looking at this information and they have different opinions. So, and after that, they basically left the place and they were directly on site. And they keep excavating. So the information, the place of discovery was on site. But the way of how the information was initiated was in the virtual world. So my interpretation of Matt Edgeworth's article is exactly that. So it's not that it's not only a place where you run an analysis and you got the result, as we are often using science, right? You use a microscope, you see something, because you see it, you record it, you have it. Well, we notice something different. We noted that this is going outside the boundary of what actually is the digital for discovering something. And we are very interested with that. For the second question instead, I agree. This actually could be tracked in a way by, for example, plotting it in a bidimensional image. The issue is that actually we have, now I don't remember the exact number, but an exaggerated number of layers. So this oven was not used once. It was used a lot for many, many, many years. So we have an incredible stratigraphy of distribution of information. So when you actually have the possibility of, on the fly, selecting specific layers and not plotting, but visualizing just with a few clicks, different scenarios, suddenly everything comes much more dynamic. It's not anymore one question, one information. This is actually strongly rooted in, it's called cyber archaeology, which is very fun, but it's a real theory, in which actually they talk about the multiverse, or the possibility, which they say the past is not actually, there is not one interpretation of the past. There is actually multiple interpretations of the past. Depends, of course, on what are your questions, which look at basic, but it's an interesting theories. And the possibility of engaging with the information at this level allow you actually to have a much more granular view of what are the relation also of a, I would say, standard flotation or analysis from seeds. So, of course, you're perfectly right. You could create technically hundreds of these layers, but it will never happen because it takes too long. It's really take too long. So it's a temporal things. So, but I hope I answer.
Thanks, Niccolo. Always inspiring to listen to you. Regarding this, using more and more powerful tools, and your generation of archaeologists, you have been back to the days where you really were digging and doing the analysis on site. But the coming generations, do they miss something? Does the community forget something that you really practice and your skills were I mean, you excelled in skills in the digging side. Now you have other skills, but you might forget something that is essential. Have you seen any examples of such knowledge that you forget when using these new powerful tools?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's absolutely true. It's actually, this is a huge discussion in archaeology, in which, for example, there is a great value in drawing by hands. It's not something that, actually there is, for example, Giuliani, an old professor of mine when I was studying, which he wrote a fantastic paper when actually said, in archaeology we don't document, we don't draw for documenting. So documentation in archaeology is not a geometrical representation, it's a mean of establishing a relation with the monument. Because it's true, when actually you're drawing, you take your time. You actually take your trowel, grasp it, and say, this is the right layer. You touch the document, you analyze the different parts. So there is a relation actually happening in it. And yes, we are losing a lot of it. So there is a discussion. What is important is actually understanding what you're losing, I think. And the idea of this losing skills or de-skilling, it's something that humans actually do all the time. I don't know if you read the funny paper on I follow with a car in the lake. Google told me to do so. You know, it's a real story, unfortunately. People driving the car, just getting lost. We are losing a lot, actually, of skills. But also, we are gaining many more. So what is important, I believe, or the only thing we can do is tracking this carefully and making choice, critical choice, I mean, adopting technology with critical touch. But I will actually turn this question for medical science, for example. I mean, if someone would saying, well, you know, we have a robot, we perform actually a chirurgical operation in a much better way, and in a few years you will have this actually technology performing it, you might have actually students losing these skills in a way. And then here we are, will be the same issue. So this is happening everywhere. And again, I believe that's having a critical, scientific, academic, critical approach to everything coming into your pipeline, it's fundamental. But yes, there is a huge discussion now, very, very huge.
Very interesting. You started by saying that archaeology is a destructive science. That's clear enough, because you cave and you cut out and so on. But with this new technique, does it mean that you don't cave as much or don't destroy as much?
This is absolutely true.
So what you lose in, I mean, can you get the complete picture even if you only have one stone?
it is actually absolutely a good point. For example, originally, excavation, we have this open area excavation. Fantastic time. So you have the entire excavation open. It's too expensive. It's no possibility of doing it. And most important, whenever you actually take out anything from the ground, you have to keep it and you have to maintain it with huge cost of conservation. So now on, people is very careful in understanding what actually to excavate. This is more really chirurgical in many ways. So what's happening is we have actually remote sensing. Thanks to the help of physics, for example, and geophysics in particular, we use, for example, ground penetrating radar, and we have a very good picture of what is underground. So we can, for example, identify in very large areas which part of the site are most informative for us. And now we only excavate in trench. So we open a trench to see specific parts. The good thing, actually I was talking about other things, but there was the moment when I was talking about Château-le-Duc. It's particularly interesting because it shows the fact that today you can actually making many trench by different people from many years, and then with this system actually putting them together. Every single of this block has been excavated by a different team in different years. So when I made this representation, many of these I had never seen them. So, but with this technology, you can basically recombine as a puzzle. So you can put together geophysics to see what is underground, because now we can visualize in voxel, and then together with this, and having a picture. But it's absolutely true. We are more careful for not only for economic reason, but because every time you make an excavation, you destroy basically what this is. So at least with the Valletta treat or form, we have been all agree in Europe of trying to be as much as possible less invasive. But of course, excavation is fundamental. It's still an important part.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk, and I was reflecting how it is that you should come from Rome, which is surrounded by archaeological findings, to Skåne. And that's an interesting sociological point. But I'm impressed by the fact that what you're doing is you are visualizing the external aspects of the objects that you find. Have you thought about using Max 4 or the European Spallation Source in years to come, so that you can see not only what is outside, but what is inside the objects that you have unearthed?
Absolutely. So first question, to answer your first question, you're not the first person who asked me that. But I can tell you, Rome is a beautiful town, but it's not a place where you want to live. So say so. Yes, absolutely. Actually, I haven't shown this in the presentation, but for example, the CT scan or micro CT scans allow to get an incredible amount of information exactly of the inside. For example, some object is completely useless. For example, if you have an object that's, let's say, has interesting geological characteristics, but it's just one piece of material. There are other objects, for example, ceramic with micro CT scan, which there are actually papers in which archaeologists and physicists working together, they've been demonstrating that by using CT scan, the way of how the ceramic in the microscopic level meet or a knut actually is informing about the technique used for creating it. And most interesting is that while we use methods of comparison, so we could say that, oh, this, for example, ceramic look like the same to this one, so they must be done, they must have the same provenience. In reality, this kind of approach proved this conclusion wrong. So it's extremely interesting. And yes, we have been discussing, especially with the dynamic collection, because at the moment we 3D scan artifacts, and you're perfectly right, actually is surface scanning, so it's bundling models. But what actually would be interesting would be integrating, and we're still already looking at some solutions to have actually 3D web visualizators which actually can see or can visualize CT scan or tomography or other type of visualization online. And this would incredibly expand the possibility of not only using our facilities in Lund, but also involving a larger group of stakeholders when it's about interpreting and interpretation. Yes, absolutely. I've been I'm part of the links, one of the links team groups, and actually in March I'm going to Slovenia to exactly discuss this. We are organizing a workshop focus on that, on 3D volumetric visualization in archaeology. So I'm really excited about it. So yes, I will keep you informed.
Would it be possible to display this material in real size in a museum, so you could walk around in your building, holographic or whatever? Are there techniques for that?
Yes, even more, I would say. For example, in a collaboration with the Humanities Lab, the Lund University Humanities Lab, UMLab. So there is a team working with eye tracking and immersive 3D environments. So we have, for example, one of the houses in Pompeii is represented, reconstructed. And what's extremely interesting is that you can walk in it, but when you walk, the system records where you watch and create heat maps without you knowing or where actually you're looking at. So at the very end, you can extract information which are informing you where the specific person has watched most and where, which path took. This is extremely interesting, for example, for Pompeian houses, because we don't know exactly where was the public and private space, and there are a lot of graffiti which we think were meant to communicate, to give political messages, so you can understand how the house was used by this, but it's not so easy. And so, yes, you can definitely have an immersive experience as a visitor, but you can also collect a lot of interesting data from a phenomenological perspective, of course, but also, phenomenology is always the problem with the quantity, data quantity. It's a lot of data quality, but it's very difficult to quantify. While instead, this method, I believe, it's fantastic because allow to collect quality and quantitative data in the same time, and then running analysis, which are really, I would say, on a different level. But there is one of the, I would say, at least from our side, most promising collaboration and with UMLab, and it's fantastic. I think the result, and also merge a lot of very different type of practices and science. So, but yes, it's there's also a lot of enjoyment in going around and these reconstructed environments. Absolutely.
You predicted archaeological sites with this LiDAR technology, but then you got lost. And so my question was, how accurate was that prediction?
It's a
Could you
good
say,
question.
I mean, how many of the predicted sites were actually found to be of archaeological interest? So,
first of all, was not my prediction. I would have loved it, but it was an algorithm prediction, so much more accurate than me. So second, of course, there is an article which we published. We got up to 78% accuracy in prediction, and of course it can increase. We were actually looking at carving cranes, so basically concentration of stones, which usually were accumulated from, we think, from the Bronze Age to to cultivate areas. So they were basically taking the stones, placing in a place, and then cultivating, and then removing this cultivation. So we're actually looking at the agricultural landscape and how the agricultural landscape changed in Skåne from different ages. But actually, the one we found and we verified, they were all correct, or most of them correct. Some of those were absolutely normal mistakes because they were very similar, but I can say that the stones were too big to be carried, so those must have a specific typology. Also others were simply, this is also interesting for the LiDAR. The LiDAR data that we have from Sverige, it has an accuracy of 8 points per square meters, so for all Sweden. Now, when you have forest, only 20% of this point reach the ground. So it's a good resolution, but it's low resolution for everything is in 2 meters square, right? So now we have a fantastic collaboration with Aviation School, School of Aviation in Lund. We collaborate, I'm not saying on the daily basis, but almost. And the LiDAR we have now, they collect 25 points per square meters. So what I'm saying is very few years now with drones, which I pilot or we can pilot, we actually can get a resolution which is incredibly higher. And in Sweden, we have, I would say, the lowest resolution compared to other countries in Scandinavia, but because we were first in doing it. So, already in Denmark, for example, which I think they were the latest in adopting this. Of course, it was a different technology. And, well, there are not trees in Denmark, so not many.
It's
so
a smaller country.
Yeah, we can find all the excuses, it's no problem. But in any case, one thing is that, yes, so this is a technology definitely with a big future for obvious reason. But also police is using quite a lot for finding illegal burials, deposition of weapons, clandestine cross between countries. So we have a lot of discussion also with them, because the techniques we use or they use are obviously the same in a way, simply apply to different cases. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Niccolo, for a very interesting lecture. And I think we can give him one more round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Okej, så återvänder till svenska. Och nu ska vi bara vänta till vi får upp en bild här på skärmen. För nästa punkten på agendan är väldigt trevlig, precis som den första. Och det handlar om en prisutdelning som vi inte hann med tidigare. Och det är vår så kallade Engeströmska Medaljen för 2023. Som i år ska gå till Gunnar Lindahl. Och Gunnar, jag ska bara kolla här. Vi får lite information här. Ja, jag ska berätta lite om Engeström-medaljen först. Den var donerad av Max Engström 1912. Och det är en medalj i guld som vi delar ut vart 5:e år. Ja, så var det. Jag hoppas att du läste snabbare än jag faktiskt. Jag har den faktiskt utskrivet, så det är jättebra. Så den är faktiskt delat ut ursprungligen vart 5:e år, men nu vart 3:e år. Till en person som har arbetat i tillämpad vetenskap rörande Skånes lantbruk och dess binäringar eller industri. Det benämns Engeströmska medaljen och den delades ut för första gången 1917. Och det har funnits rätt många medaljörer som har fått medaljen sedan dess. Men i år som sagt, eller 2023, medaljen skulle gå till Gunnar Lindahl och han ska få medaljen i guld för sin grundforskning i gränsområdet medicinsk mikrobiologi, proteinkemi, immunologi som har lett till utvecklingen av ett vaccin mot grupp B streptokocker som är den vanligaste orsaken till livshotande infektioner hos spädbarn. Så att Gunnar, du får komma upp här. Det finns 2 medaljer. Väldigt fin och stor. Och en lite mindre man kan faktiskt ha på fracken. Varsågod. Och ett stort grattis från Februari. Okej, och nu ska vi börja vår intern sammanträde. Så de som är med i publiken som är inte medlemmar i sällskapet eller ledamöter i sällskapet får lämna rummet så vi kan fortsätta med vår vanliga möte. Tack.